Real true education, not fake news. It's the 19th of October 2020. It's a very, very wet, though calm, not cold day, but wet. This is this follow-up on video 13, ABCD, 13D, on ruling C24 1919 of the European Court Grand Chamber on the SCA directive, which is most important. Now we're just going to look at a little bit to add on to it and just a little bit of a think about it, only be a few minutes. And one of the things is that this ruling had to be pulled kicking and dragging out of the EU. The only way you could get in was to pick an actual wind farm or an interconnector or some other structure and challenge it on the non-compliance with the Strategic Environmental Assessment Directive, and every attempt to get into them, to challenge it directly, was thwarted by corruption and by laws that didn't allow the citizen to take these cases. But there was one way you had to get in, and that is if a wind farm or some other thing like that was granted planning permission, then you could have that decision reviewed in the Court of Justice of the EU and see that it comply. And what this group done was they picked the guidelines made by the Flanders government, and they challenged those guidelines then. Could they make these guidelines just off the top of their head as they did, or did they have to comply with the SCA directive and the public participation aspect of it? And that way you got in, because the thing about this is, if you go in to challenge the overall National Renewable Energy Action Plan or some part of it, everyone else can sit back. When you challenge a wind farm, the company itself can't build a wind farm. The whole investment is put on hold. They can't get to work, and so the state and the whole EU is in a terrible state, because now the whole thing is blocked. And so by challenging the grant of a planning permission, they have to deal with it. And in this case, they were backed into a corner. They had to decide, is the SCA directive law or is it not? If they ruled it wasn't, that would be such a travesty that it had damaged the EU. But the point is, if they had to do this and enforce this directive in the way they did others in time, there might be no Brexit. Because I myself and several others used the failure of the EU to enforce the SCA directive on all the wind turbines in Scotland and in England and in Wales. And we went after this to show how the EU is corrupt and to vote for Brexit. And Brexit was only passed, if you take half the difference in the yes and no's, Brexit was only passed by a small amount of votes. They're too late with it, but they're better late than never. Now this is the directive again. If you want to look it up, that's it there. 20142 EC. And there has been an earlier case, 1509. On demolition, and in this case the European Commission took Ireland to task, because in the regulations requiring an environmental impact statement, that's for the local planning, it exempted the demolition of buildings, and they were able to pull down all and everything. They knocked down the house of the O'Reilly fella in the 1916 leader was it Herbert Park there recently. So this is the thing they wanted: bulldoze all out of it, bulldoze the market houses out, bulldoze all, and the public can do nothing about it. And the EU took them to task, and they fined them and stopped it. And that regulation had to be changed now, that they can't pull down buildings without doing the environmental impact assessment and the right to public participation. So the other one was the Derry Breen wind farm. Now the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive came out in 1985, and it wasn't until 2010 it was written into Irish law. So you had a situation where groups like ours and me and others had to try and force them to do the EIA directive, the proper assessment of it, rather than just an old planning thing where they just sit down and say, all right, granted for a development, that's all right. But we made them do it, and it was a tremendous cost, and the Irish public didn't give two damns about us or anything else. They just said, oh, to hell with you, you're only a crank. But the Derry Breen wind farm, nobody bothered in making any kind of a submission, and there was no EIA done properly, and they never assessed the possibility of the whole land mud from the mountain and the whole turf all coming down into the local village, and it killed 50,000 trout in the river. And so the European Court of Justice took Ireland to task, and they've been fining them, and they will not budge on it. And we were fined 5 million there recently, and we're paying 15,000 a day fines for leaving that wind farm there, up there. So the EU can, if it wants to, force the law, but they should have forced this one, and they didn't. Now, the thing about it is, what could you do about this judgment? Well, it means that all things like the interconnector, the north-south interconnector, wind farms now can be challenged under this, because what the judgment says is that the guidelines they brought up for wind farms cannot be made just on the drop of a hat. They have to be done with proper SEA and public participation and the right to make submissions and judicial review. So the court wasn't asked about the wind farm itself, it was just the guidelines. So with the wind farm, when you knock the guidelines, the whole planning permission falls, because the guidelines are what the planning permission guides the planning permission. But I have no doubt that if you challenged even the interconnector, there may not be guidelines, there may be something somewhere on it, but if you challenged it on the fact that there's no EIA, it's built on the National Renewable Energy Action Plan, then the National Renewable Energy Action Plan itself of 2010 would have to be struck down, because it was not done with proper public participation. That's the case I took. They only allowed 10 days for public participation. So that was a good possibility. You definitely have to get your costs there under Section 50B. Under Section 50B, you only pay, each one pays their own cost if you make a good case. And this is why it was such a pity with the North-South Interconnector and the northern part of it as well. So that's, could you challenge it now? Well, there's a case in Holland. There's a case in Holland. And we'll just look at that in a minute. Could you challenge your electricity bill? Possibly. Could a power company challenge it? Could a new power company come in and say, we'll run a cheaper electricity service, we won't pay any wind bills? They're getting a premium, big subsidy off your bill. Huge amount. And that's going up. So could you challenge it? Could you challenge the refit, renewable energy feed-in tariff? It's possible you could, because the renewable energy are illegal. Now, any addition to a wind farm. Now here they want to put up a wind measuring mast here in Rara wind farm, and I'm only waiting on them. Hopefully they will health sticks it and I'm about to be able to go, and we'll challenge it maybe on that and a number of other things. They thought they'd get away with doing it. And I wish to God this judgment had been out earlier. I'd have been able to stop them putting up the cables, but we didn't have this judgment, and I hadn't the wherewithal to go on the whole way to Europe. You need lawyers in Europe anyway. So again, that's undemocratic. I can't go in and make my case. So anyway, what about the pylons? Well, there's a one before the courts, and I'll have more on this, in the European Court of Justice, where there are a big wind farm partly built, and it's been challenged now on this. It's been challenged. So we'll see. I mean, if permission's granted for something which is damaging on the environment, and the European Court rules that an SEA is needed, and there's no SEA, surely you could challenge it. And even Section 160 of the Planning and Development Act, which allows the ordinary citizen to go in and stop something which is illegal. It's very possible you could. So that's Section 160 of the Planning and Development Act. And if you're ever going into the Planning and Development Act, go into the consolidated version. Now the thing about it is, with the interconnector, they can't say there's a non-urgent need for the electricity, because they're running the whole system now. They'll never be able to say they need the interconnector now immediately, because that's the exception in the ruling. They can keep it going for only as long as it takes to put it right. So I'd say that the interconnector could still be maybe challenged. I'm not too sure of that. Please don't hold me to it. But they can't use the defence that it's needed, because it is not needed. It's not there now. Could it be used to close down wind farms? I don't know. Anyone that had invested in a wind farm after this is mad in the head. Will the EU fine countries for not doing it? I doubt it. They're still left-wing, renewable energy, green mad. So it's like a public house without a licence. If you have no licence on your place and you're selling drink during this, and the guards come in and find you that you have people on the premises after hours, they can't do anything because you have no licence. It's a shebeen you're running. You have to be prosecuted for not having a pub. So I may sharpen my pencil, and a few of us, and maybe we'll find something. It's a great advance. It's great relief for people now, and the next thing is to get it before the courts, and the right thing to do will be for the Irish government to admit they got it wrong and stop all subsidies for new wind farms, and for Bord Pleanála to accept that this is the law. But I don't think Bord Pleanála will do it. They'll have to be forced. So we'll have to see how it goes, folks. I think I've made it clear to you how everything works and what it's about. Essentially, the Strategic Environmental Assessment Directive, particularly Article 2 and Article 3, has always been cast aside by the Irish government, by EirGrid, by pro-wind people, as not relevant. They said it's not relevant because you have the local environmental impact assessment. That means that Bord Pleanála and Cavan County Council and Meath County Council are expected to assess wind energy and all the engineering aspects. And if you transfer that to a chemical industry, a chemical plant, well, how could they know what chemicals are? They don't have degrees in that. What about a nuclear plant if it was built? What about an airport? What knowledge does Cavan County Council planners have of any of these things? Or even a chicken factory or a pigsty or anything else? The whole idea is if it's a big planner programme at a national level, it's assessed at national level, somebody's appointed, could be Airgrid or whatever, and it has to be properly assessed, and there has to be a mark or demarking, there has to be a separation between the people doing the assessment, if it is Airgrid or whatever, and the main body. They have to be separated and have to be independent. And so that's common basic sense, and it goes back to the proportionality principle that you have to assess. The EU law is subsidiary, it's higher, but there has to be assessment, and they have no assessment. They've behaved undemocratically. They've destroyed my environment here. They've destroyed the environment of several places, because wind energy is a scam. It doesn't do anything. We can prove that it doesn't do anything. It's a complete joke. And they're burning coal now all over the place, and they're digging after opening a new coal mine in Britain and all that. Now you may say, oh, that's a pity, that's a pity. That the issue is not whether it's good or bad to be green. The issue is, does wind energy and solar panels work? Do they provide you with power? And the answer is very, very definitely not. You can't let any more than 60% of it into the grid, and they're all losing money hand over fist. I made videos on that. So folks, there you are now. That's a short video. It'll hopefully help people now to understand how we've got this great judgment, which says that any regulations about anything have to comply with the SCA directive, and where there's no, it follows that where there's no actual guidelines, that they have to have an SCA done for the reason they're doing it. So if they're building the interconnector for wind energy, they have to assess the wind energy. And whether or not that can be done yet is a big question. I hope you enjoyed these two videos and that they weren't too long. And I probably don't think I made any mistakes. If I do, I'll put it down underneath. It can happen because I have to move on now and get something done. But I want to bring that urgent to your attention. And no matter where you are in any part of the world, the SCA, there's usually a Strategic Environmental Assessment Directive. And if we weren't in the EU at all, we'd have one here in Ireland, and we could prosecute it in the local courts, in the High Court. The fact that the EU court is there and takes responsibility for this means that if they don't obey them, if they don't carry out the responsibility, we have nowhere to turn to. So then that's oppression, that's tyranny. So when the EU took on with the job, it should have made sure it did the job. And it didn't take on with the job, but it took the citizens of that area of Flanders, those people, to take this case, and finally the inevitable came on. What I've been begging has happened, and we have proof now that we're on the right road all along. And if you read the directive, Article 2 and 3, it's quite clear that there has to be, as this an environmental assessment with public participation under Article 6 has to be held for energy, farming, forestry, fisheries, and a number of other things, river water management and all that. And this is why the rivers and all that are flooding, all of this should be assessed. So folks, I hope I've made that clear. It's 13 minutes, and that's the end of me now for today. I'll get them downloaded, and if you have any questions or anything else, I'm sure people will be on to me. A few people have reviewed this, a few people who know what they're talking about have reviewed it, and we are right. Oh, we're dead right. They were backed into the wall, and they couldn't but honour their own directive. The pity is they left it too late, and but it's better late than never. Give me a thumbs up if you agree. You can give me a thumbs down. Some of the Greens will be very sorry over this. We can't go on building this nonsensical form of electricity generation. So we'll let you go, and thank you very much. See you back.